Hello, welcome to the Daily Grind here on Latte Firm, day 10 of the transfer window, the summer transfer window that has come to a close, but it's only half time, kind of. I'm delighted to be joined by George of the Cannon podcast today. George, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, mate. It's good to be back on the show. I'm a big fan of you and the channel, and I'm just excited to talk about, some Arsenal stuff because I think it was a tough season, mate. Like it's almost like you went through a post-mortem, and then I don't know if you're like me, you like to say, okay, what's next? What can we do to improve? And that's the nerd in me, and I'm excited for what we could talk about today.
Well, I'm super excited because we are going to talk about Martin Zubimendi, the future metronome of Arsenal Football Club. We woke up this morning looking forward to another day of tumbleweed, but David Ornstein broke the news that Real Madrid are not going to get anywhere with their remontada. We are going to sign this guy at some point this window, and I'm super excited, George, to get your thoughts on what you think we've signed, why you think we're in for him, what qualities you think he'll bring to the team. We'll bring up sort of breakdown style, some slides. I want to get all your thoughts on the player. Before we to dive into that, tell us how you feel about the transfer window in general. And I'll set the scene by saying that this is a huge opportunity for Arsenal to not only make a statement and get us right back to the top where we belong, but actually correct some of the misdoings that they did last January and last summer. How do you feel?
Yeah, it is a very difficult position to be in because I'm somebody, I think like yourself, that likes to look at why the club is doing a particular thing. Of course, maybe things can go wrong or they can go right, but a big thing for me is understanding the why. And one of the biggest things that frustrated me, and probably my biggest statement of last year, was that Arsenal didn't recruit a forward in the year 2024. I couldn't understand that statement. I couldn't get over what that meant as like an implication. Um, and so I think when you're approaching this transfer season, we're looking at a season that was, I would say, not growth, but not falling off, almost stagnancy. And that to me is something that we haven't experienced necessarily in our time with Mikel. So it led to me maybe feeling, okay, let's reflect, let's see what we can do. But then also it's tough to kind of ignore what happened, in January and what happened in the summer and from some of the things that we've heard throughout the club in general. And I sat there and I said, okay, well, what are the needs of this transfer window? And I believe that there was quite a few as far as the forward department. There was something in midfield. We're looking at, both Jorginho and Thomas Partey. And of course, we're going to be talking about that solution today. But I think that there's a couple other, holes as well, potentially an overlapping left back to complement a certain Rodrigo that has been linked, some exciting names. What does it mean to kind of platform those players? What are some of the tactical changes? And, I'm even going as far as looking at the Peps and the slots and what they've been doing. And it's actually really quite interesting that I feel the title contending teams have very much changed a lot of their philosophies. Like you look at Pep, we're talking about Ray and Neri combined with Livermento, very different philosophy in overlapping left backs. And you've got Arnie Slot doing the Frimpong and the Kirkaz thing, looking at Florian Wirtz. And, there is kind of almost this symmetry of the 4-4-2 coming back in style. And for people that are a little bit older, I see a lot of, some old football philosophies coming back into play. And it's exciting. And I think that Arsenal are no stranger to that. So I think that this transfer window will actually see us respond in a similar way. And I mean, the two top forwards, Sesko and Rodrigo, mate, like that's a 4-4-2 partnership in its whole. So I think that we're seeing a movement in the top clubs towards a kind of unification of something along those lines.
Well, as someone who's been around for a long time, I'm one of those older fans. I remember the days of 4-4-2, and I got to be honest, I loved it. All my
Hmm.
Sabutio teams over the years have been built on 4-4-2 sides. George, I'm optimistic about this transfer window. I think Arsenal have to make a
Yeah.
statement. We have to react. Last January, last summer, particularly disappointing. And of course, the season petered out for us really early this year. A lot of pressure on the club, a lot of pressure on Berta, on Arteta, and the group of players to deliver next year. So I'm really excited. And it looks like, I mean, obviously, Kepa seems to be in the bag, but it looks like Martin Zubimendi is going to be our big first proper signing of the window. And I guess my opening question to you is, the oracle has spoken. He is set to sign. Arsenal are convinced that we are going to sign this player. 26 years of age, of course, and he will be part of the pre-season with Arsenal this summer. So my first question is to you: why are Arsenal interested in Martin Zubimendi?
Yeah. Firstly, I'll talk about the broad scale about it because I think it shouldn't be overlooked. I mean, we have a little split screen there of Madrid and Arsenal, but I really think we need to emphasize this point. Martin Zubimendi is a player that has been wanted by every major club. Of course, we've seen what happened last year with Liverpool. We've seen the consistent links to Bayern. We've seen the links to Madrid. I don't know if it's because maybe we're a little bit tired of having the name consistently linked with Arsenal, and we knew this since January, but this is a phenomenal player that every major club was after in the last 18 months. And I think it's a major coup that isn't being spoken about enough, particularly with Alonso going back to Madrid. I don't think it was as much of a given as people are making it like seem in terms of him just continuing to agree with Arsenal. I think that there was definitely some really good things that we must have done in order to promise a project to him. And you know what? For good reason. I won't beat around the bush. I look at Martin Zubimendi, and you've mentioned the metronome. The one thing that I've talked about so much with Arsenal is this idea of a gas pedal, the idea about understanding the tempo to team. I think that we struggle at times in possession to really make sure when to speed the game up, when to slow it down, and really have that understanding of the gas pedal. And we'll talk about Zubimendi because he isn't in the traditional pass volume type of metronome that we're going to see. But the two words that I want everybody to just think about when they think of Martin Zubimendi: touch efficiency. This is a guy that makes every touch count and is very intelligent with the usage of the ball. And that's going to be really key about understanding how we use him in different ways. But all in all, mate, like this is just a huge signing for me, a really big pillar. And I think that it's going to be one of the signings that we look back on that has changed some of our midfield construction the most, because he does his best work in the middle third. And we have a certain captain that also does his best work in the middle third. So seeing how those two combine and create new symmetry is something that I think is going to be a little bit of an evolution that we haven't quite seen this season. I don't think it's as much plug and play as people might think with the Thomas Partey out and Zubimendi in. He does offer a lot of interesting skills.
He does, and we'll take a deep dive into those just shortly. But I'm really glad that you opened with the tempo piece. Like, I picture Martin Zubimendi in my head as a bit of a dial, like a volume dial. So, like, if we need to speeden up the play, we've struggled with low blocks, with frustrating mid to deep blocks this season. And I think someone from deep trying to control that tempo, adding when we need to, and just speeding things up and then slowing things down to really control. That's what I'm really looking forward to. And there's so many qualities that he brings. So, what do we know about Martin Zubimendi, George? Let's have a look at his profile. We know that he's 26 years of age, currently playing in Spain in La Liga for Real Sociedad. 1.8 meters, so just shy of 6 foot. Sadly, he's not quite the physical monster that we all want in midfield. Only 19 international caps. Like, when I saw him play for the Spanish team in the Euros and, of course, the Nations League, I thought he'd had many more caps for that. Surprises me as someone who's 26, but burst onto the international scene quite late. Preferred foot right, loves to play defensive midfield and central midfield. We'll talk about that maybe towards the end of the show. And ever present, 33 appearances this season in La Liga, 58% of his duels won. And the last time I did a breakdown, I was doing the numbers for Mikel Merino, and he excels in each of these three features compared to Mikel Merino's time in Spain. So if you guys think Merino's good in terms of a dual monster, in terms of passing accuracy and whatnot, this guy's going to be insane. Dribble pass 0.4 times per game. Mikel Merino was 0.8 times per game. Very clean, 6 yellows, no reds, and his contract expires in Spain June 27. When you look at the dial, and I'm sure you're very familiar with these, courtesy of Scott Willis of the Canon Stats website, what's your overall take on the profile of the player?
I think this gives a really good defensive description and what some might see as an underwhelming passing influence that I think the stats don't tell the complete picture when you look at maybe some video combined here. Like, if I was to just look at this radar and remove Martin Zubimendi and just isolate it, you might look at a player who is decent in build-up, but not elite, and who seems to be phenomenal in terms of his success with his tackles, interceptions. And people might say, are we recruiting another Thomas Partey or another Mikel Merino? Are we recruiting some of the same type? And so I think what's really interesting is just the use of how Real Sociedad have used him in this way. And it kind of highlights some things that maybe people might be afraid of as some weaknesses that are actually strengths. And you mentioned the height. That's one thing. When you look at him, he looks like he's 5'6", but people forget, like, he's 5'11". Like, he's not this diminutive kind of Spanish midfielder in that narrative. Like, he definitely can get about, and I think his tackling technique is actually incredibly efficient. Very, very good. And it's why we see these numbers about being so successful. But the defensive marquee part of Zubimendi is the anticipation, mate. He's got that Jorginho mind where he can be ahead of the challenge before anybody else. He understands that game, and so he closes the distances, and he's got a really good burst as well that we'll talk about how he uses it offensively as well. But that 5 yard kind of acceleration thing, he can get to a play very quickly, which is really good. The only thing I'll say is if you do watch Zubimendi in larger distances, it is something that he can struggle with. He can have a bit of the parachute in big distances if you have the game in large distances. But we're a team that have some of the highest field tilt numbers with the highest defensive lines, and the idea is to keep this spaces small. So for me, I don't see him in that situation too often. And of course, if that's your weakness, it really helps to have a partner named Declan Rice to be there. And so from a complement standpoint, it just makes sense. A lot of what I'm seeing here in these kind of statistics, it shows a great defensive player, but I would definitely like to talk about some of the technical things because as far as the radar goes, it doesn't show he's bad, but it doesn't show he's great. And I do not want that to be the conclusion from people. Like, I think when you talk about Martin Zubimendi, the on the ball added value is huge, but the stats kind of read it's defensively that that is excellent. So that's the only probably caveat I put to the radar, at least.
When you think about, you say he's a very clever guy and he can anticipate and read the ball well. The Premier League we know is unforgiving in terms of time on the ball. They will be digging at his heels very fast. They will be not giving him space to kind of dictate from deep. How do you feel about his, I guess, acclimatization to the Premier League? Is that somewhere where you think might be challenging for him, that first sort of 3 to 6 months in England?
So I think that there are two types of players. There's your traditional P and P, and there's your traditional technical player stereotypes, and both of them have different adaptation kind of concerns to the Premier League. I think with Martin Zubimendi, people might be afraid, can he handle the intensity and the speed? To me, this intelligence is what counteracts it. His mind is ahead of two steps, so it's not a matter of him moving faster. It's a matter of him thinking faster than other people. And so I think that, his major strength is the picture, the awareness, his game intelligence. And so being able with a higher intensity to think faster than other players means that I don't think he'll get caught out. The one thing that he might need to adapt a little bit more to is the style of defending in the Premier League, which is a little bit different to La Liga, where I do feel that in the Premier League, people are up your backside a lot sooner. There is a lot more intensity to essentially getting man to man and battling kind of in a man-to-man fashion. Whereas in La Liga, it's a little bit more zonal. You do have a little bit more time in the build-up. But again, this is a guy who is incredible with the touches that he uses, the efficiency that he uses it with, and for understanding the picture around him. So he doesn't need many touches to get it under control. He also has a picture of exactly where he wants to pass it before he receives it. So I think that there's challenges, but to be honest, his play style really combat that. So I'm excited for his adaptation. I think he'll do really well. And we may see even more usage higher up that I definitely want to touch on because I don't think this is just a 6. I would love people to kind of, as they look throughout this kind of daily grind, think through a lens of a Gundogan as well.
That's interesting. I'm going to talk about touch maps and passing in just a second. I mean, just to finish off the profile piece, he's a one club man. Born in San Sebastian, signed for Zubieta, I think is what is known as the Real Sociedad Academy at 11 years of age. Made his La Liga debut when he was 19, has represented Spain at under 17s, under 19s level, and of course now got his 19th cap this weekend. Unfortunately, a defeat for him against Portugal. So this would be a big move coming over to England, a new country, a new league, but he'd be settling quite well, I think, with Mikel Arteta at the helm and so many Spanish-speaking players. Let's have a look at his sort of on the ball movements and something that really caught my surprise. Now that the top sort of table, courtesy of Sky Sports, and the charts, they're courtesy of Opta Analyst. Pass wise, not the pass monster that I thought he was in terms of volume. Equally, not as successful in his passing. However, forward passing, breaking the lines, almost going back to that point about controlling tempo and starting things from deep. The left hand sort of chart on the left hand side is his touch map. The right hand side, which is just a massive mess of pink, is his pass map, but it's a beautiful U shape. Tell me about him on the ball.
Yeah, I think his intelligence and how he receives it is phenomenal. Like, he's quite two-footed in the way he can receive, which opens up kind of so many different angles, as far as him not really having much of a bias to take it on either foot, and, that helps as well with, you know, combined with kind of his speed and how he likes to accelerate. Again, he has this really brilliant burst. So what you're gonna find with Martin Zubimendi, and what I don't think is brought in the stats, is when he does receive off the first line between the center backs, many times the first action is a burst pass. It's a turn, quick pass, and then maybe a quick little progression to the next player. And I think that doesn't indicate a huge volume passer, but it's the way in which he progresses that is kind of different to other people. I think, like, when you're looking at some other comparisons, Thiago Alcantara did that quite a bit.
Yes.
Not necessarily a volume of a pass, but no one would doubt the ability that he had in order to progress the ball. And I think that Alcantara had a lot more agility than Zubimendi, but they have very similar ideas about how they like to break pressure. And they like to do so with using the ball. He'll let it go across his body to open up and kind of feint another attacker. And he's very intelligent about how he uses his body to get the ball from A to B. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through a pass. But one thing that I do love is his ability to spot forward passes. And this is 100% why I think people should also look at the Gundogan lens. And I'm going to insert this. People remember last year there was a game against Liverpool in which Jorginho played more as the higher eight. And I think that's a role that you can see Martin Zubimendi really thriving in, because when you look at this pass map, it is conservative, it is safe in kind of the first phase, it's really efficient. However, when you start to get higher up the pitch, a lot of those lines start to get longer and they start to get more adventurous. And that's what gets me excited, because I start thinking, okay, from an Arsenal perspective, we've actually had some pretty decent buildup. Adding somebody else there is always going to be a pro. But sometimes what we've struggled with are those physical mid blocks in terms of breaking down some of the tempo of the game. And this is where, for me, Zubimendi has a huge added value that hasn't been talked about too much in terms of his signing. He has an ability to stab passes between the lines really, really well, has an ability to spot gaps quickly and early, releases the ball as such, and he also has got a really brilliant switch on him, something that I don't think that we've done enough of this season. That long ball switch out to our forwards so that they can get to 1v1 isolations a lot quicker and sooner, and Zubimendi will absolutely help with some of those things. And the percentage of being passed forward being so high is what I think a lot of people will look towards for the effectiveness of his progression. And you're just going to see that he's got really every type of pass in the locker. That's what I love. He doesn't have to think about it. Like, there's certain players that you see think about having to make a pass. Zubimendi plays with the pass, a certain type of technical empathy that tells his receiver what to do with the pass. And that's what I really love about it. And that care with the ball and that extra bit of progression through central zones is something that I think that we haven't had the best at. I mean, we are historically in the Premier League one of the worst teams at central progression broadly. That's a play style thing, but Zubimendi will open up some avenues in terms of getting it to our eights quicker and through the middle of the park, which means that we can maybe access zone 14 a little bit earlier. So yeah, those are really exciting kind of caveats to some of the statistics with some of the passes.
Are you expecting him to sort of box crash as well? I mean, is you in terms of position? Let's bring that up actually. His position map, courtesy of Opta Analyst, shows you that he played 75% or three-quarters of his games in defensive midfield in La Liga this season. He played a quarter of his games in central midfield. I like the idea of him sort of, especially with the long switches, controlling the game like a quarterback. He'll just be sort of sitting in front of the back two. He'll ping those long balls to either, Rodrigo or Saka, dare I say, or Martinelli or whoever. And then that ability to play those little dink balls both centrally and out wide. Like if you're going to get a target man like Sesko, who's got the height and hopefully the link up play, we're cooking, aren't we, George? I mean, but do you expect him to get in and amongst the assists and the goals as well? Is he capable of that?
I definitely think from an assist angle, we could definitely see something, and even from a box crashing angle, because he's got some pretty good legs as far as him being able to keep up with some repeat sprints. And one thing that I can see is just a move towards a more traditional pivot with Arsenal. We've always played with two, but just to simply break down and not get too nerdy, I mean, we all know the inverted left back into this kind of 3-2 build-up shape. We've seen it. We all know it quite well. I do think that Zubimendi offers a little bit of flexibility, and one of my favorite kind of formations that I saw this season was this kind of 4-2-4 formation that we did kind of use at points in the season. And I really think that Zubimendi and Declan Rice are going to operate in a more traditional pivot. So what does that mean in terms of some of the positions? He's going to find himself in higher eight positions at times. And that's going to happen when the ball is on his side of the pitch. And Declan Rice will sit when Zubimendi goes forward to create an overload. And then vice versa, when the ball switches to the other side of the pitch, the opposite pivot player is going to go high in order to kind of support play and maybe operate with this whole different heights narrative that happened in the Athletic, which just simply means it's fancy language for saying I'm going to operate a little bit higher when the time calls, when the play calls for it. And I do think, for example, let's say we have an overload on the right, and Declan Rice could be coming up to support play down there. Zubimendi may sit, but he has the opportunity to box crash with a quick switch. And that's what I think you'll see them switch between, really, right? If the ball's on the left, Zubimendi will be a little bit higher, offering a little bit of support to create an overload. Declan will be a little bit deeper and have that ability to run himself into space. This is going to be a shared responsibility, and we're not going to see basically number 6 and only number 6 with Zubimendi. I think we're going to see some flexibility to the zones, but make no mistake about it. Zubimendi is somebody that can split the center backs, receive off the back foot from, your goalkeeper, really help you in that regard and give you a ton of solutions. So we will definitely see him maybe be the preferred person for the first pass, but that doesn't mean in the final third we won't see some pretty exciting potential access to the center of the park and assists that way.
My mouth is watering. My mouth is watering, George. Listen, I think we're all excited to see how he sort of settles into Arsenal. Hopefully, if we can get our man over the next few weeks, I think we're waiting until July to pay this release clause or pay an element of it for accountancy purposes. But if we can get if we can get this guy over the line, it's an immensely exciting signing. And just one last question before we sort of wrap up. If we were to get Zubimendi, obviously we've let Jorginho go. There is still rumours about Thomas Partey being extended, even though he was on the release list, courtesy of the Premier League yesterday. With Odegaard and with Rice and with Marino, do you think we're still one short? Would you like to see us add one more in midfield? And if so, what sort of profile?
Yeah, I've been talking on X quite a bit about the potential fear for another person with legs because I'm looking at that midfield group, and the one thing that I can say is that I just don't think Mikel Merino is a player that I love in the first phase. When I look at Mikel Merino, despite for me not getting a fair shake of the adaptation turntables, in a sense, he's struggled a little bit in that sense, and not to like a fault of his own. He came in injured; it was difficult in that way. But personally, I just have to see what I've seen so far, and he's really impacted higher up in the pitch. And I think at times when we've played him a little bit more in true midfield roles, he's shown to struggle a bit in deeper build-up. So I don't love considering him in that mold as like another pivot option. And so when you go through the list, if Partey is going to be in or out, that's going to be a question mark for me about who can replace a Declan Rice. Like if Declan Rice goes down injured and I'm looking at a quartet of Zubimendi, are we going to put Havertz back in midfield? Is it going to be Jorginho's not there? Like it does to me seem light in the legs department. I don't know if we'll be able to fix it this summer in terms of everything that we have to do, but I even have probably a little bit more of a hot take that I'm sure everybody loves when you start saying those things, but Mikel Merino could be a shorter term solution in the squad than I think people might see, because I look at what the next year looks like, in my opinion. If you start to add another person with legs, you have Zubimendi, you have Declan Rice. We've got another year of Ethan, of Odegaard, got a lot of 10s in the squad. Where does that leave that kind of second striker role for Merino? I don't know. And I don't think his role in the team is as sure of foot in the next year as other people.
I think you're quite right. I've spoken about Mikel Merino just recently, actually. I'm not sure. Like he shouldn't be a striking option, despite all the good stuff that he did towards the back end of the season. And I don't think he's a starting midfielder, but that is a conversation for another day. Listen, that's been fascinating, George. Really excited to hear your thoughts on Martin Zubimendi. I think he's going to help us in so many ways. I like the idea of conductor at the back, playing that sort of quarterback role, the metronome deep in midfield, sort of playing it out wide and controlling the tempo like a volume dial. I love that. I hope he acclimatizes quickly. The Premier League is unforgiving. He's going to have no time to breathe, but I'm looking forward to him playing alongside Rice or just behind Rice or maybe even in front of Rice. Let's mix it up a little bit. Listen, George, where can people find you on socials?
Yeah, you could do GeorgeV_AFC, or you can catch me on the Canon podcast on YouTube.
The Canon podcast. Alexander Moneypenny, how do you like them apples? Hey, George is on latte firm right now. Listen, I really appreciate that, man. Thank you so much for your time. If anybody wants to follow George, there he is, available at GeorgeV_AFC. George, thank you for your time. Really, really interesting and insightful. Tomorrow, we will be back on the Daily Grind with Clive of the Arsenal Vision podcast to get his thoughts on the summer transfer window and what he would like to do with this club. We've now got a break, I think, for 6 or 7 days, which is the most pointless break in the transfer window. The Club World Cup is about to start, but there we are. Until tomorrow, guys, look after yourselves, take care, and bye for now.